when I first came to San Diego in 2012 and took the job here at USD, I was wondering who was doing digital humanities in San Diego, because I came from the University of Nebraska, which has a very well-developed and renowned Center for Digital Research in the Humanities. So I was thinking, well, there must be somebody around here doing something. So I Googled DH San Diego and found Jessica Pressman and went, whoa, she's in town? I emailed her, she emailed back, and a friendship was born. So I'm very grateful that you're here, and to my other collaborators who are growing in number. I'm also extremely grateful to collaborators outside USD and also inside USD, including my students. So the Tudor Plays Project, today we're going to focus on the work in project on the disputed authorship of a play from the 1520s. So, but what we will do is I'll give you an overview of the project and talk a little bit about digital humanities and undergraduate research collaboration. And then Jude will talk about the research problem that we're working on. Emily will talk about corpus preparation, and that has nothing to do with funeral parlors or anything. So it's preparing texts to analyze them. And then Paul is going to talk about the testing of our text samples. We are so lucky to have Paul at USD and indeed in San Diego. Paul just happens to be an expert in the technical area that I needed an expert to parachute in to work with me on with this project. And then finally, I'll talk about the next steps that we'll be going through in the project. So first of all, undergraduate research collaboration, and I emphasize the word collaboration. I don't regard my students as helpers on the project, or indeed the IT people here at the university or Paul. These people are not helping me. They're my partners and collaborators. And I think that's an important distinction to be made. The Tudor Plays project was sort of born when I was doing my graduate work at Nebraska. I was looking for resources on Tudor debate plays, and I couldn't find any. And so out of that came this thought, well, maybe I could develop some. And of course, it's an enormous topic, and one shouldn't work alone, I believe, on enormous topics. As Joanna mentioned this morning, the tradition in the humanities is the solo monograph and the virtuoso work of scholarship. The digital humanities pushes back against that tradition. And in fact, in working on Tudor drama, earlier Tudor drama, what I found is that there are about 12 other people in the world who work on the plays of John Caywood. And frankly, I'm not very interested in doing coterie scholarship for those 12 other people. I'm much more interested in working with students and other collaborators to develop these resources that we do need, because Shakespeare may suck all the oxygen out of the study of Renaissance drama, but he came out of a tradition. He didn't just appear a genius out of nowhere. So the Tudor Plays project focuses on Henrician drama. Henry VIII gets his own adjective, even though there are lots of Henrys. Henrician drama is essentially plays that were written and performed during the time of Henry VIII. Many of them are, in fact, court plays that were performed before Henry VIII, and some of them even ridiculed him. The first secular drama in England comes out of the circle of Thomas More, the humanist circle. So we heard a bit about post-humanism today, so I'm going to take you back in time to Renaissance humanism, just a little bit. So right now, the Tudor Plays project is working on its pilot play, which is Gentleness and Nobility, an anonymous play from the 1520s that we do know emerges from the intellectual circle of Thomas More, which included a number of his own family members. It also included the great Dutch philosopher Erasmus. The intellectual circle of Renaissance humanism was quite cosmopolitan and international. So we're working on a number of things that are collaborative faculty-student activities. We're developing editions. Just in the last year and a half, the Tudor Plays project, under the leadership of our head dramaturg and now associate director of the project, Jude Caywood, developed the first ever modern English performance text of this play. And you've probably never heard of Gentleness and Nobility. Fine. It's never performed because there's never been a modern English performance text of the play. And earlier Tudor English, You think Shakespeare was hard when you were in school. Henrician English is really hard. We're also developing an archive of performance videos, and we've created a little performance troupe here at University of San Diego called the Tudor Players, under the direction of a woman who's just really brilliant and energetic and teaches in theater and in the music department here. Her name's Ryan Scrimgeour. And over this academic year, we are filming 4 scenes, performances from the new performance text. In fact, we've finished filming the first one. I wanted to show you a clip today, but we're still fixing the sound quality of what we've done. And then also, we're doing authorship attribution work on the play. It's an anonymous play. We know roughly the circle of people it emerges from. There are a number of playwrights in that circle. And there's a big debate about who wrote the play. Well, not that big a debate. Well, it used to be a really big debate. In the years before World War I, there was a vicious scholarly debate conducted in journals. They used to do that. Now it wouldn't be considered civil. But there was a really vicious scholarly debate conducted in journals over the authorship of this play, and people were calling each other names and all sorts of things. And then World War I happened, and people stopped talking about it for some reason. And then in just the last 10 years or so, this issue has come up again around this play and who wrote it. And I want to emphasize for you the importance of collaboration. There's the cursor. It is hard to see. Let's see if this comes up. Yes, it does. Here's the pilot website for the Tudor Plays project. And there, I'll expand it. Hide my dogs. This is the pilot website, and it's a pretty basic website at this stage, but we just want to start getting some information out there on the project. But what I want to emphasize here are the people. We couldn't do the project without the people, and there you see Ryan and Paul, and of course Jude Caywood. And Jude's sister Abigail Caywood is a designer for the film project, and we have the Tudor Players here. My mom was in town and did hair and makeup on the first film. Yasmin Hachimi is now a PhD student at UC Davis, working on early modern feminism. And she was in the original cohort of students in the fall of 2014 working on the project. So I want to illustrate, I'm bringing Yasmin into this and also Emily Schlichting into this, because I want to demonstrate that every student who ever works on this project, everybody who collaborates on the project is going here. Everyone will be recognized by their contribution. Emily Schlichting was a student at the University of Nebraska when I was a graduate student, and we got a grant for her to work on the very early corpus preparation work on the Tudor Plays project. And she's now the chief of staff to an undersecretary of, she's amazing. Anyway, so that's what I just wanted to illustrate, the importance of collaboration, but also the importance of giving credit to the people who do the work. These people are not my assistants, they're my collaborators. So I just wanted to illustrate that in a concrete way. And then finally, Pamela showed us the Collaborators' Bill of Rights that UCLA has generated. Is Pamela still here? There you are, right. And Media Commons also has a Collaborators' Bill of Rights for Digital Humanities, sort of digital humanities community rules. And it has a lot to do with giving credit, the type of credit that people get, their rights to claim credit in their own resumes and CVs for the work that they do, and to be acknowledged for the work that they do. And then finally here, I want to take note of this, that funders should take an aggressive stance on unfair institutional policies that undermine the principles of this Bill of Rights. Such policies may include inequities in intellectual property rights or the inability of certain classes of employees to serve as PIs on grants. And that's a problem that I may be confronting soon, although I hope not. We can talk about that. So I'd like to turn it over to Jude Caywood to talk about the research problem. But I also, before I do that, I'd like to answer a question before it gets asked, because working on authorship attribution, sometimes I get a little pushback. And the usual question is, what about the death of the author? Somebody was going to ask that, right? Well, the death of the author, of course, there's the essay by Roland Barthes from the late 1970s. La mort d'auteur. He's making a play on words. He's making a joke about the death of Arthur. And so a lot of people have interpreted have overinterpreted his title while failing to read the essay with any genuine attention. He's resisting the notion of authorial intent governing our readings, but he's not saying that we shouldn't think at all about authorship ever. And so I think it's important to realize that in this sort of historical authorship attribution work, it's not just about who wrote the play and identifying the author. It's about the entire cultural situation out of which these plays emerge. So we're talking about Renaissance humanist philosophy. We're talking about the cultural conditions of theater in the early part of the 16th century. We're talking about household drama. We're also doing various critiques that have to do, especially with the play Gentleness and Nobility, which is a critique of privilege, aristocracy, and social inequality from 1525. And that play is just as relevant today as it was then. And so this work is not just sort of a fun hobby. We're looking at it from really from a cultural studies standpoint, and not just from a sort of, who's the author, sort of old-fashioned source criticism kind of approach. It's a very different, much more complex approach. So with that, I will turn it over to Jude. And would you like to come up, or shall I keep flipping? Yeah? Okay, I'll flip for you. Okay.
So as Maura mentioned, we began our project really with the question about the authorship of Gentleness and Nobility. And since that was our first play, that was the first portion of this project that we looked at. And as she mentioned, there's been a debate about who the author is since really before World War I. And the two men associated with the play are John Caywood, who was both a playwright and an actor, and John Rastell, who was also a playwright and a printer, among many other things. And so the question of authorship stems from conflicting evidence that is provided by the corpus. The first is the frontispiece, which you can see on the left-hand side. That's a portrait of John Caywood, and it suggests some association of his with the play, if not authorship. So whether he was the author or an actor or both is unclear, but he's definitely associated with the play. The second piece of evidence is the colophon, which you can see on the right-hand side, which indicates that John Rastell has an association with the play. The script reads, Johannes Rastell me fieri fecit, which means John Rastell caused me to be made. And that particular phrase has two potential meanings. The first is that he is the author of the piece. And there's an association in early English literature between a maker and an author, that someone who is a maker of a piece is its author. Chaucer, for example, uses it in his poetry. And so this phrase could potentially indicate that Rastell is the author of the piece. It could also indicate, and that's further strengthened by the fact, if you go to the next slide, I think, that Rastell used the phrase me imprimi fecit to indicate works that he had printed rather than perhaps written. And I think the next slide shows this other interpretation of me fieri fecit, which is the second idea about it, about Rastell's involvement, is that he was the printer, because me fieri fecit in early manuscript tradition refers to the patron of a work rather than the author. So in this example, it refers to Geoffrey Luttrell, who was the patron of the Luttrell manuscript, and indicates that he was the person who funded the manuscript rather than the person who actually wrote or copied it out. And it's the phrase is also used by early printers like William Caxton, again indicating that it may be a reference to Rastell's involvement in the play's printing rather than its authorship. So the question really that we were up against is, was Rastell the author or the printer or both? And was Haywood the author or the printer or both? Or was it a collaboration between the two? And our kind of goal with this project was not really to offer a conclusion on the debate or a definitive answer, but really to provide further evidence about their involvement with this piece.
So the preparation of the corpus means essentially getting rid of any noise in the text samples that you're going to use when you put them in this program in order to compare them. And the noise, I'll get to that in a moment. But one of the things that we really need to give a big thank you to is the Text Creation Partnership, which was a collaborative effort from the universities of Michigan and Oxford to create an online database of the short title catalog, which is a compilation of British literature from about the 1400s to the 1700s. And the first phase opened to the public in January of 2015. And Gentleness and Nobility and our other comprehender texts were all online. Sorry. So we were able to use them instead of having to get copies of the manuscripts ourselves and translate it from manuscript printing in order to Times New Roman, so that it's not that. I'm just nervous. I don't do well with speaking in front of people. I apologize. Okay. So we have to give a big thank you to the Text Creation Partnership because it saved us about 2 years and $30,000 of work and money. So like I said, our comprehender plays were the list of plays that we used to help compare Gentleness and Nobility to plays already attributed to John Heywood and to John Rastell. So we have examples of their plays, examples of their rhyme royal for the philosopher's speech at the end of Gentleness and Nobility. And we also have distraction plays, which are the John Redford and John Bale plays. And those essentially are a way for us to show that the program is working. Because when we put all of our samples into the program, the distraction texts should be in one cluster by themselves, and Gentleness and Nobility should be somewhere within John Heywood and John Rastell's work. Another big thank you that we need to give is for Mackie Ader and for his article on author attribution, because it helped us understand some of the obstacles that we would be facing while doing this work, such as variations in spelling and word meaning. At this point in history, there was no standard spelling for the English language, so we have a lot of different ways to spell it, along with manuscript tradition being transferred over to printing. There's a lot of words that we kind of have to look at and go, what is this word? Because vowels are not here, and what is this? As well as like the style of the plays we're working with as well. If they're parodies or an imitation, that could affect the way they fall within the program. So with all of this in mind, as we were working on our samples, we came up with a list of rules that we would apply to each sample individually in order to standardize them. And we decided to apply these to the samples individually instead of across the board because we wanted to keep the integrity of the samples we're using. And part of that could be how the words are spelled. So for example, Rule 11 has a bunch of questions with the spelling of with. And one of the things that we would talk about as we're going through these samples, editing them, is how do we deal with one word spelled multiple times? Do we make it whatever the majority is, which has been our decision, or do we just kind of leave it be? Other issues that we came up with were errors in that translation from going to the manuscript to online, and what if the manuscript printing R looks like an N? Well, that changes the word and that changes the meaning, and that's something we need to look back on, as well as the meaning of the words when they were used then. So we created this set of rules in order to standardize the text and help us make sure that we were applying the same rigor to each sample that we went through. Once we finished going through the sample, we'd upload them to our GitHub repository, which was a database that we all had access to, so we could keep a running list of all the samples we've used and were prepared for the program, as well as just making it easier for the programs to grab the samples and go ahead and read through them. And I will now let Paul explain that.
We, last March, Maura presented I'll say our preliminary findings at the Renaissance Society of America, and we did a number of preliminary tests intended to support that presentation. And we did this, the tool that we are using for the most part is the stylometry for R package. Emily mentioned Mackie Ader, Jan Rubitsky, and Mike Kestamont are the authors of this package, and we're using it in R Studio, which is an environment for running R programs. And it's very nice. It gives you this nice graphical representation that you can adjust in various ways that shows you the clustering of your different samples. So this is just to give you an idea of what this looks like and what the interface is when you use it. This gives you so this is looking at all of our samples and just simply taking the first 100 most frequent words. This technique is not interested in unusual vocabulary of the author. It is looking at most frequent words. It's very much dependent on common words. And this is just a first pass to see what things look like if we just take the first 100 words right off the top. And you notice we do have our distraction text to Bayes' 3 laws, and it does wind up being an outlier. But we do get the interesting result that Gentleness and Nobility clusters with a play known to be by Rastell. The Philosopher's Speech is a text from within Gentleness and Nobility, but it's in a different rhyme scheme than the rest of it, and at least some of this pre-World War I controversy revolved around the issue as to whether the Philosopher's Speech was written by somebody else. And so, interestingly, these cluster very nicely. All the known Caywood plays cluster very nicely. Now, the normal way you start, this is sort of a first pass, the normal way you refine this kind of thing is you then really hone in on the function words, the prepositions and the conjunctions. And for me, this was sort of an interesting exercise in that all of my scholarly work is in 12th century Latin. And this was the first time I'd ever done this is the first time I'd ever done it in any modern language, and it raised issues which I should have thought of but didn't, like we have auxiliary verbs in English, which I think the next time I do this, I am counting those as function words. But all the verbs went out the door when I did this. And so here we have the 65 most frequent words, but with the content words thrown out. And again, we get the Philosopher's Speech, Gentleness and Nobility, and Rastell clustering very, very nicely together. This is This is the list of the 65 words we're currently using. If you were to look at it very closely, you would see that there's further work I have to do on spelling normalization. And we also tried this out using Lexos. Those of you who were at the SDSU event last year remember Scott came down and did the Lexos demo, and this is an example of that. And again, we have Philosopher's Speech, Gentleness and Nobility clustering very tightly with Rastell. Maura?
Next steps. Okay, well, these tests were run with text samples that were about 1,000 words each. The next step really is to develop larger text samples that will give us results that we can be a little bit more confident in. The tests that we ran in the spring, particularly, we wanted to do them sort of test the programs and see if our hypothesis might be somewhere in the ballpark. My hypothesis about Gentleness and Nobility in my pre-digital days was that it was a collaboratively written play. And so we'll be running several different types of tests, including tests to see whether parts of the play, we'll be testing different parts of the play to see if different parts were written by different people, which is an interesting possibility because often collaborative playwriting is attributed to much later in the 16th century than in the period that we're studying. So there are a number of possibilities for results, and one of the possibilities is that we won't get any conclusive results. But we need to be honest researchers and to be open to the possibility that we may conclude this part of our project on the Tudor Plays project with more questions than we started out with. We need to be open to that because that's what happens sometimes. All right. Thank you.